Alrighty, hey everybody. A little bit of a delay. I forgot to open one of my programs, so I was hitting the button on my Stream Deck, and it was just like not doing it, Chief. I'm like, what's wrong with you? It's operator error as usual. Happy Monday, everybody. Hope you're doing
Yes.
well,
Hello.
or whatever day if you're listening in the future on podcast format.
It's good to be here.
Yeah. So it's gonna be a fun conversation, I think. There'll be lots of points I think we can make, some interesting stuff to hear about all the different thoughts that you all have about this. It's kind of a big part of a campaign, but before that, I'll say if you haven't, go check out our YouTube. So I think now, is it official, the TwitchCon announcement? Is it official now that you
It
can simulcast
is
everywhere?
official. Yes.
So I don't think we can directly link to our stream over there, but
Correct.
we have a YouTube channel. And they give us more money if you support us over there. So go check that out.
I think we're not supposed to mention monetary value though, but yeah,
Oh.
we're live on YouTube right now, youtube.com/@casters and cantrips.
Mm-hmm. Maybe if we're
Yep.
lucky, they'll give us a coupon to hand out for 70-30 split. That's a different story we can talk about later. Anyway.
Yeah, so you enjoy the content of our streams, whether that's our live stream or this podcast, and you want to support us and make your dollar go further, there's ways of doing that.
Like Patreon.
Yeah.
So yeah, go check those out. Patreon, our YouTube, or even just you watching and liking or sharing. That also helps us too. And we appreciate anybody who takes the time out of their day to do that, because it does help. Because it helps feed the algorithm and makes the algorithm think that we're important.
Yes.
Can you live stream on Patreon? Is that a thing?
I don't think so, but we can on TikTok. Anyway,
yeah, we'll talk about that stuff later.
Anyway, aside from that, our what's the word I'm looking for? Programming schedule, as always, is Tome Knowledge right now, or 6 p.m. Mondays, Art with Bun, 7 p.m. Tuesdays, Thursday exclusive to YouTube, or our podcasts are our Out of Combat episodes, or behind the scenes, and then Friday is our campaign 2 at 6 p.m. Pacific. So go check out all those things. But tonight we're talking about quests, adventures, how to do them.
Very important thing in D&D.
It is. It's bread and butter.
I thought you were going to say very carefully. How to do very carefully. Thanks, folks. Have a good night. Yeah. I think there's kind of, and this is just my mind of thinking, like there's two kind of categories, are like how to come up with the quests and then how to like present the quests to players. I think that's a logical like grouping in my mind, unless you all can think of anything else.
I'm just a participant in the quests. I don't know the first thing about designing them.
Well, you know if you like them or you don't like them.
That's true. That's true.
You also have a keen mind in the way of D&D, more than you give yourself credit for too, VS. So I'm pretty sure
Also
we heard
true.
some brilliance when we were making up our homebrew race a couple weeks ago. So
Yeah, it's pretty good.
I have to take your word for it.
I don't want to hear that. I'm just here. VS is just a DM who is not DM'd yet.
A DM waiting to be born.
Yeah.
Maybe. It would be fun.
Yeah. So I think some things for, I want to talk about quest delivery first. That's cool with y'all. I want to come up with, and I'm going to say, I don't have a great track record because y'all didn't do a quest on the second episode of campaign 1. Didn't know it was a quest. I'm just kidding.
It was a lot going on. We're new to D&D live streaming. We're just, sometimes things fall through the cracks.
If you haven't seen campaign 1, very early on there was a little thread that could be pulled that I introduced, And mind you, this was like the first time we got together and all like did a campaign and played D&D. And I think it was around like episode like 40 or 50-ish. And you were like, wait, we could have done this like in the beginning. I was like, yeah.
Wait, we got back to it, so it didn't go to waste.
No, I'm just giving you
Just
some
like
shit, man.
what, a year later.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the easiest way um to give players quests, and I almost forgot my spiel about quests. There's plenty of information in the Dungeon Master's Guide under chapter 3, creating adventures, adventure types. It talks about like location based. When they say adventures, think of like quests and things to do, kind of synonymous. But it talks about location based adventures, like event based, mysteries, intrigue, all that stuff. And then there's also some information about linking adventures together in the DMG, like how to get your quests to really form into a more of a campaign. And then Tasha's has some interesting stuff that I'll talk about in a moment. But my usual spiel of go read the books, they're helpful most of the time. But good question. First, define a quest. Is it any adventure or specific adventures with specific meaningful objectives? I would say for me, when we're talking about a quest, like shit you can give your players to do. It's something they can do. And because in my mind, when I think adventure, I think like large overarching, like multiple things. But when I think quest, almost like in the video game sense, but not the same, as like, hey, I have a thing that I need to do to accomplish. Maybe mini quests make up adventure. I don't know. Define it however you want to define it. Probably I think the easiest way to deliver quests are NPCs, right? However you want to do it, there's all kinds of different ways. Like you could have like a town crier, someone who's talking about news, who's ringing the bell and talking about the day-to-day events that are going on. I think there were a couple of those in campaign 1. Giving them like little threads of things going on there. You could also do things that are specifically related to like character backstories. So someone from a character's past would be a good way to introduce a quest, because more often than not, depending on the backstory, is if someone shows up from a character's backstory, they're probably gonna want to talk to them, or at least the player will be interested in that.
I guess, yeah. Quests could also be like ethereal, right? Like it could
Mhm.
just happen. You come across uh a merchant and his wagon is broken and you repair the wagon. That is
Mhm.
essentially a quest. Or bandits are raiding a nearby village, and that
Mhm.
just like things could like be as super granular as you want, or vague, or all that jazz.
Yeah, random
Yeah,
encounters are good too.
it could
Go
be
ahead,
tied
Vias.
it could be tied to something a player found in a previous quest, maybe an item or a treasure or a note that leads to some other plot thread that they can follow.
Yeah, making items based off of it is
Mhm.
another great thing, almost like in campaign 1.
Yeah.
With your character, an item provided you with some things to do.
Yeah.
um I think too, rumors can be good, that can come
Mm.
from NPCs or things. Like if they're in the tavern, can they overhear some people talking, or that could be anywhere, just to kind of get the information out there in the world. um Letters, anonymous letters are always good. you know Someone delivers a letter to you from whomever, that's literally a piece of paper telling you things.
I find it exciting sometimes where, as a party, if we're kind of shuffling along, maybe in between quests or something, and you will say, point to one of our characters and be like, "Give me a perception check,"
Mhm.
or "Give me some sort of check," and it could be a way for us to like maybe we saw something happen out of the corner of our eye that the party then has to go investigate, or maybe they heard something like a sound in the woods that they're not familiar with, or those types of things when they happen because they feel organic in the moment kind of make me perk up as a player like, "Ooh, why is he making them roll? Why is he making me roll? What am I gonna find out? What's gonna happen?" I think initiating even just small side quests with that too is kind of fun for me as a player because there's a sense of like mystery about what is it we're about to get into.
Hmm. What are those
I
in the? Oh, go ahead.
I mean, campaign 2 is a prime example of the players creating their own quests because we need a scroll of knock. We can't just buy it. We have to find the materials for it. And then you, Max, as the DM, turn what we need into a quest line. Like now we have to go
Yeah.
out and scavenge all these components to be able to craft this scrolls just so Max's character can scribe it into her book.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think those are interesting things of figuring out what your players need and like what they, because that's all kind of by design of that particular line of quest. I don't want to go too deep into it because this isn't the place for campaign spoilers, but um specifically you got hold of an artifact or an item that necessitates you to have some materials to do some things with it, which is just kind of lining up, quests on quests, the whole idea of why you went to the place where you got the artifact. That was a whole different quest where we had, a guest come on the show and basically present the quest to you. Which, I mean, relating to character backstory, we kind of mentioned it earlier about NPCs showing up. You could have the player initiate some of these stuff too.
Right.
Let's say my player is, a valiant knight who has to go rescue someone. That's going to be the player introducing, like, hey, I need to go here and do this thing. That equally works out as well. But what are those called? Like radiant events, radiant quests, things that just kind of pop up in the moment that you kind of just do. Is that what they're called? I think that's what Starfield calls them or something like that.
I
Like
don't know. Sounds
branching,
fancy though.
yeah, like
Secondary quests that just kind of happen that aren't part of the main story.
yeah. And those sort of branching quest lines, like for instance, where we might need a material for something, and there's one location that we know of that has it. That could be a brand new location for the party, which then, when they arrive, opens the door to location specific quests or further delving into maybe a character's backstory because they might meet somebody there related to their backstory.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a opportunity to just constantly like allow threads to be laid out in front of the players to try and pick
Mm-hmm.
up on.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did not last week, the week before last, on our last episode. That was kind of the thought process of they need a thing. They're going to a brand new place. That brand new place is just kind of a treasure trove of things that they can do and explore while they're there.
Mhm.
So yeah, another great point. There's one that I haven't really done that I really want to, and it's going to pop up at some place or time at some
Mm.
point. I really like the idea of using in media res, which is I think it's stands for like in the middle of a narrative. So you basically start, which I guess I did do that in campaign 1 with I'll just say the imposters.
Mm.
Where basically they just start in the middle of it and there's no sort of lead up to it, and then after that you kind of unwind how it all happened. So I think that's a really cool technique to use it sparingly, albeit you don't want to like shove that in front of your players every week or anything. Just another like idea that comes from that, of just putting them in a situation, dropping a minute, letting them figure out what happened, and then kind of go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Village brought up a question. How many quests is too many quests? Like When are you like overloading your players with too many side quests?
I think it depends on how they're introduced. So like if your party's like a band of like, mercenaries, right? Giving them like 10 contracts in a row, that's probably too much. I think you just kind of have to feel it out with your party, because I just drop threads here and there, and if they pick it up and pull on it, that's fine. And if not, then that's fine too. Because it's really up to the players on like what they want to do, right? Kind of keep that into consideration of like what kind of game do your players want to play. That's important as well, because if you're dropping a lot of stuff and they're not picking up any of it, that's probably a different discussion, is what I would say.
I think sort of the fact that D&D as a game is a collaborative effort between
Mhm.
DM and players. I If the quests are introduced in enough varied ways, I don't as a player, I don't know if I'd feel overloaded, because there's a sense of freedom as a player to be able to pick and choose like where you go as a party. DM could introduce in a particular town 3 different quests. You don't have to do any of them. You can do all of them, one of them. So I think kind of the party can kind of set the pace at which they take things on. So I'm not sure. Granted, if you threw like if we first arrived to a town and you threw 10 NPCs at us, they're like, "Hey, I got a job for you. Hey, I got a job for you. Hey, I got a job for you." Then that might be, not great. But like you don't ever do that. That's
um, Another thing too of ways to like kind of deliver or introduce quests, like quest board, bulletin board, things people
Mhm.
need, things people want, things people need help with. Like it's a reason it's a trope in video games, because it's super easy to do. Hey, what is there to
All right,
do in
yep.
this town? Let's check out the quest board. Okay, there's 3 things here. What do you want to do? Super easy. Um, I don't think any player would bat an eye if you introduce one of those. Just don't do it every single time. But
Yeah.
it's another
Yeah.
tool in the toolbox.
I love incorporating that in my games, like because there'll be an adventurers guild, and every city has their own adventurers guild. So yeah, it's just like if the players feel like they want to just do something random, they can go to the job board, and I'll usually have like 3 encounters prepared, just like loosely.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I guess for the answer to Village's question, depends.
Yeah, it depends.
Depends.
Feel it
Yeah,
out. Don't overload.
it depends on the type of game the players want too. Like if it's just
Yeah.
like magical adventures and they just want to go around doing venturing stuff where there's not really uh any critical situation going on and they just want to have a good time, then yeah, super easy to just do those all those random things.
I think it's important as a DM to sort of feel out the game and figure out what works for your players too. Because some of these techniques, they might not pick up on some of this stuff. Depending on how your group is, figure out which sort of, try different techniques, whichever ones work, stick with those. If, um, another great one too that I can't believe I didn't say earlier are like dreams, visions. Those are great. You can introduce whatever you want in there. I think I'm a little biased because I've done that. I think in both campaigns now, or at least some sort of semblance of a direction to go. But
The Ron shot too was all dream sequence.
Yeah.
mhm,
It's definitely effective in terms of ways that you can deliver a quest, because oftentimes they can be tied to one of the characters' backstories, which then everybody perks up because everybody wants to know a character's backstories. So you immediately the rest of the table is probably invested,
mhm,
and it's a good way to dump some lore as well, for what's going on. So yeah, that I think dream sequences, visions are like an extremely effective form
mhm.
of quest delivery.
Agreed. Trying to think of if I can think of anything else, but in the meantime, I think we've got some more questions. Let's see. How do you get inspiration for requests for players? That'll be in the second half. We'll talk about that specifically, how to come up with them. But your question of how do you fix a quest that you find players are not interested in, despite you wanting it to drive the plot? Now, I think that there are two types of problems in, in D&D. There are problems that should be solved in game, and there are problems that should be solved out of the game. And if your players aren't interested in a quest that is important to the plot and like the main story, I kind of feel like that's an out of game conversation to have with your players. Because not everything has to be solved at the table while you're playing. And for me, if it was something for, we'll say my campaign, if they were interested in one thing, I might try a different hook to sort of bring it up. But after that, I might be like, hey, what kind of game are we playing here? What interests you? What do you want to do? Because maybe the sort of main story in your mind that you had thought of is not the kind of game your players want to play, which hopefully that was discussed in like a session 0 or something. But yeah, I think that if it's important to the plot, think you want to move it forward, I would just bring it up with them outside the game is kind of what I would do. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's definitely it depends on your group and how comfortable the players are. Like you could just bring it up on the spot, and we're like, just rather than like struggling through it, it's like, hey, this is do we really? Is there another way we can do this? Because this is not enjoyable. But obviously, if we were live streaming and that was happening, that was definitely like an after stream discussion. Yeah, it's up to the group and how comfortable all the players are. But yeah, like if no one's having a good time, or just at least, or even one person's not having a good time, it's definitely a conversation worth bringing up because the point is to have fun.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And because I've only ever played in these two campaigns with you as the DM, and I don't recall for our campaign specifically quests where it felt like things weren't going so well in that way. I think that's because as a DM, you're pretty thoughtful on that sort of stuff. So we don't run into that much. I think it depends on like, is it that the players are not interested in it, or is it they're just not grasping sort of what you want them to solve for that particular quest, or are they struggling with an encounter or a puzzle? Or I feel like when players lose interest in something, it might be for various reasons, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily that the quest is bad or something like that, or they're just not interested in it. It could be some other hang up. And again, that's something to discuss, you know, with the players at some point. Like, hey, noticed you guys seemed to be struggling a bit. Was it this or that, or
Yeah, and one of those reasons could be like they don't know how to start it. They don't know how to get into it. They don't know how to like
yeah,
even begin. And I will say that for the most part things look pretty smooth on stream for a campaign, but we do talk quite a bit outside the game of questions of like, hey, what are you all interested in? We've had those conversations before too. We've had a conversation of like, okay, if you all are going to be like pirates, like what kind of pirates do you want to be? How, like, on a spectrum of like what did I use? And that's, I made like a survey. It was like on a scale of like Muppet Treasure Island and like Black Sails, where do you want the piracy to fall in between or something like that? So it's
yeah,
important to talk to them and figure that
Yeah,
out.
I don't think anyone picks Black Sails. I
No,
think for the most part we were like Pirates of the Caribbean
most
Disney
people are like in the
style.
middle, yeah, in the middle of the road. But yeah, it's that's one of those things, and I'll caveat that with too is the way that I kind of run things and how I set it up in my mind is that I just create the sandbox and let them play in it, kind of thing. So for me, for little things that I introduce, if they don't pick them up, like that's fine by me. After you play a few sessions, you kind of get the idea of like what direction, like what the trajectory of the party is going to be, and then you can kind of start to formulate some of those like bigger blocks of like more important and like heavy quests. But for like stuff that's just introduced, I'll use the term like side quests, loosely. But if they don't use it, that's fine. I'll put it in my back pocket and I'll use it somewhere else and change up some stuff and put it in my toolbox. Because even if they don't do it, doesn't mean this has to be gone forever. But I think we can go ahead.
Question for everyone here on the pod or on the cast. I don't know how they say it, the PC. What do people say? I don't even. It's not important. And for chat, what type of quest are you least interested in?
Ooh,
that is a
good one.
That is a good one. Least interested.
I don't know. I'm generally pretty open to most things because I just have fun playing the game.
Least interesting for me, and y'all probably already know this, anything that has to do with puzzles. I don't give a shit about puzzles. I don't want to solve them. That's for if other people in the party want to do that, that's great. But I don't want to. It's not for me.
I would say fetch quests, with the caveat fetch quests without a purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're not playing EverQuest from the 90s, right? Like, oh, go please gather me 3 bat wings and 2 haunches of meat. Like if it's just like mundane fetch quests, then I don't like those.
Yeah.
Oh shit. Buns in the chat and said really hard moral social encounters, which I think are like most of my things that I do. Whoops.
I don't know. Those can be really fun because then you really get to see character motivations come out.
Use them sparingly, not like an every quest type thing for sure. You want to move into oh, go ahead.
I was just on what Village was saying. Says you haven't seen an escort quest in D&D. I think escort quests are fine in D&D, but I absolutely hate escort quests in video games.
Yeah, because they're usually not done well.
Y'all absolutely had an escort quest that you immediately abandoned and can't make to. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
you're right. Absolutely right.
Yep. And we potentially maybe might pick up another one.
There's ramifications of what has been done.
Yeah. Yeah, I think escort quests can work better in D&D because I think that the problem with video games is they don't ever go fast enough. The person that you're escorting, but in D&D that's not really a problem because they go as fast as the plot does, or as fast as the plot does.
Or they're just useless. They don't do anything to help at all.
Or if you're too fast and then they just stop and just don't know what to do. Like, oh man. Anyways.
Oh yeah, Bun, like don't make me solve a trolley problem in D&D. Yeah. So like morally heavy things just to be morally heavy. I agree with that.
Yes, Village.
Okay. I thought it was like math, like carriage B is traveling at 15 miles per hour. And
oh no.
In 3 days, but carriage A is going 35 miles per hour.
I'd love to solve those in D&D. That'd be great for me. I love math.
And then the question is, who's the driver?
Yeah. No, I agree with that. No trolley problems just to be trolley problems kind of thing. What I want to get into is like coming up with quests, because I know there's a question about like how do you come up with them or What are some ways that you can introduce, quests into your world? I think that kind of the answers for this can be as whatever you want, right? Um, Inspiration, as in like movies, like film, television, books, games, right? I definitely don't tout myself as being some like literary behemoth or anything. I just use the experiences that I've had and try and, you know, gather the knowledge that I've done from, however many years of playing D&D and watching TV and reading books to get ideas.
And video games.
Video games, yeah. But aside from that, like getting inspiration, and there is an excellent section in the end of the Dungeon Master's Guide, if I'm not mistaken, that is an Appendix D, Dungeon Master Inspiration. It gives you a whole list of things to look at. And I think the Player's Handbook does too, has another list of things. So for coming up with quests, depending on your game, big one, look at your characters' backstories. Look at all the juicy details that are in there, or look at the details that aren't in there that you can fill in the gaps. I love doing that.
Yes.
Another thing too is like if what kind of even if it's a module, an adventure guide, if it's your own homebrew world, like if you have a town, for example, and there's two warring factions, like there's a bunch of quests you can have involved between faction A and faction B, or even if there's a neutral party where you create that conflict in the lore within that town or world, and you can use those as potential quests. Like, does the party side with adventure A? Does the party side with adventure B? Does the party side with the neutral party, or does the party just become murder hobos and just eliminate both parties and not worry about it? I mean, there's still worries, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of what I've done, especially campaign 2, are things that are sort of products of the campaign setting. Figure out like what your world is like, what how do people exist there, like what we was just saying, what different factions exist in there. Look at your villains. What are your villains trying to accomplish? Like that kind of stuff. And that's how you can come up with, I think, with ideas of things that you want your players to do. So I think once you flesh out the world and kind of understand where people are living and what they're experiencing, for me, it gets easier to figure out um, kind of what to do there. So, like in the stuff that you all are experiencing in campaign 2, it's I spent a lot of time crafting this particular city in this particular area, and the religious aspects, the societal aspects, what kind of form of government they have, what are the normal people doing, like what problems do they have. And when you kind of understand some of those things, then I think it makes it much easier to sort of figure out what those people want, what they want accomplished, and then leverage your players' characters as an avenue for them to accomplish these things.
Yeah.
It was very
Shelby has a
long-winded. I'm sorry.
question: is how do you keep a good balance between quests and action, so to speak?
Depends on your group. And I'll say that our group has definitely evolved over the years too. Because I know, and we've talked about Mac a little bit. When she first started, she's like, I got to have combat. We got to do combat, and if we went more than a session or two without combat, she wasn't having fun. Whereas now, kind of how the groups evolved, I mean, shit, the last episode we had was almost all RP and lore. I kind of felt bad at the end. I was like, man, they actually didn't roll a whole lot of dice, but I mean, that wasn't a problem for y'all. It's just something in my
I
head.
I enjoyed it. Yeah,
Yeah.
like, you don't always have to roll dice, and I think people love lore dumps and
Mhm.
learned a lot about Azric
Yeah.
last session. Um,
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
so it
even
really
though
depends on the party.
even though not many dice rolls happened, there was still a lot happening.
Mhm.
We, again, like Moop said, learned more about Azric through several NPCs. We got to learn more about through those NPCs more about how that particular location does things with their military guard, with their religious stuff, um, which opened doors to more requests for us potentially, um, new factions to line ourselves with if we so choose. So there was still a lot happening, even though there wasn't action happening.
Mhm.
Um, so, and
Or
again, that's a hallmark of one, Max's DMing style, being able to carry that, and two, us as players having played together for a couple of years now, and being able to feed off each other, and you know, getting more comfortable in that sort of RP heavy
Mhm.
setting where it was no problem, no issue for us to not roll that much dice.
Yeah, and I think too, a lot of these questions sort of will come up, at least in in some session zeros, of like, hey, like on this scale, like, are you heavy combat, like all combat? Are you all RP? Are you somewhere in between? Figuring out what your players want will go a long way. Because I know that there are some people, and I know like even on like early like Dimension 20 stuff, where like one episode RP, next episode was like combat, and that's almost always how it happened, sort of like the one and the other. But it really depends on the group and what they want more than anything. If they're a combat heavy, all we want to do is go out and beat up monsters and get loot. That kind of sets the tone for your game and how you should approach it, because it really depends, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know these are kind of hard, not easy answers because it's like again, it is really dependent on your players or your group or the people you play with. So that's why communication is so key. Because once you find your group, like your core group where like everyone trusts each other, everyone's comfortable, then it's just like good times all
Yeah,
day.
yeah. That's a question, Village. Have you ever had players request like specific types of quests from you? Yeah, and I think that that comes with the experience of like knowing the players. But I think early on, I may have asked, like, "Hey, what do you all like?" You know, just because I, as a player, don't like puzzles doesn't mean I'm not going to include any in the campaign that I run. Because I know some of my players like combat, some of them like puzzles, some of them like want certain things. So you just kind of have to weave them in there. Um, for that, oh, for like I want this specific magic item, can I have a quest to get it? That's totally doable. You know, if they want to say, hey, there's rules for creating a magic item in the book. This is the item that I want, and it's really important to my character. Like, how do we do this? I'd be like, great, let's figure it out. It's going to cost you some time, going to cost you some money, and there's probably going to be a whole bunch of quests you'll have to do. Yeah, and an easy way to do that, are kind of like what we're doing now, is like, hey, you're going to have some kind of ingredients or something to make this out of. You're going to have to figure out like a formula or a blueprint of like how to make this magic item. And depending on how rare it is, that can really kind of spider web out to whatever you want.
Which I was very glad that you came up with that quest because I think for maybe a session or two, we kind of felt lost as a group, not really knowing our path or what to do or what's next. So that really honed it in for us. We're like, okay, we have a plan, we have a mission. So we felt very confident after that, like where we
Mhm.
know where things were going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We moved at pretty much a breakneck pace from the get go in terms of like how our campaign began. We started in the thick of things and it didn't slow down for a couple of sessions. And then once we sort of, without revealing much about what happens, kind of resolved some things, there was like a natural lull where it's like, okay, where do we go from here? What do we got? What do we know? And yeah, Max definitely helped us out with, hey, look, you guys have these things, and there's you need maybe a spell for this, and so
Yeah, and that's conversations you can have with your players too, because I think and it's hard. Like as a DM, I know all the things that are happening in the world, and I know the threads that they can pull on. But there are times I think where I've talked with the group or Buns kind of relayed some stuff to where it's like, hey, here's the things that are on your plate right now. Like you may not remember this thing from like 10 episodes ago, kind of thing, but here are the things on your plate right now. Here's what you can choose to do now or anything different. And that can always start a conversation of like, well, how do we start this kind of thing? It's okay to talk out a game to make sure that your in-game experience is smooth and better. You definitely don't want people to be in the dark of not knowing what to do next. But I will say, as a DM, I have learned from playing with you all that you all do not like to choose sides. You like to walk on the fence as long as possible.
Yes, we do. Our side is the right side. That's our MO.
Again, because that's sort of the characters that we come up with. It just happens to be that way, I think. We don't have anybody with any strong attachments to anyone that we know of. I mean, somebody could.
Yeah.
We still don't know much about each other, so
Yeah. Because campaign 1 was really easy for us to meld and mesh as characters because we are already part of an organization and we already knew each other. So it was kind of like a very easy start for us. And then campaign 2 is exact opposite. We just kind of hurricane together and just out of necessity needed to stick together. So I think it's more challenging for us as players and as our acting skills to try to like make this group work. And it's just like it's still pretty early, so it's just like things haven't necessarily clicked for everybody yet as characters.
Village has another interesting question that's kind of along the lines of what we were just talked about. It says, what are your thoughts on competing quests? For example, helping the Thieves Guild blocks quests with nobility. Do you think those kinds of decisions empower players or hinder them? So we were
I
just
will
talking about
say
factions and
video
stuff.
games do it all the time. Reactivity.
Yeah.
I love it. I love that shit. Make them choose and their choice. Because that's the thing people always want when they're playing like video games. I want my choices to matter. I want the things that I do to affect the world. And D&D is a perfect game to do that because as the DM, you can do whatever you want. And you can present the world to them in a way where they have to pick a competing quest and the world continues to revolve despite what the players do. So I love them. I'm sure there might be some players that might have the idea they want to do everything, but that's more of a discussion. Yeah. Because you can't win D&D.
Thing. Yeah.
The only way to win D&D is if you're having fun. Yay.
Well, I have a question for you, Max. As a DM and how spontaneous players can be or impromptu, how do you go about thinking of possible ways that players can complete a quest? Because it's not just A and B, right? Or black and white. They can talk their way out of it, or they could convince someone, or they could just straight up murder someone or bribe someone. Or there's just like so many ways of how your quest can be completed. Do you have like they should complete it in your mind? You're thinking they should complete it this way, but also leave it open for other resolutions.
Yeah. I will say as a DM, you can't think of all the ways that players could possibly try to resolve something. Don't waste your time on it because they'll still surprise you. In my mind, I think of like generalized outcomes that could happen, maybe a couple ways that it could be solved, but I like when players surprise me. I think it's great when they come up with unique things that I don't think of. It should be rewarding. You just have to kind of, as a DM, be on your toes and really flex some of those improvisation skills for sure. But I don't think that's a problem. Like, unless it's like a very specific quest with a very specific outcome, right? If you get a quest of like, hey, assassinate this person, might not be a lot of ways you could resolve that. Unless you basically turn on the quest giver, but
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Or if you have some real smart players that have access to some fun magic stuff, you might be able to
sure.
toy around with it. But yeah.
Yeah. And even then it's like y'all already popping off ideas. It's like you think of, it's best to, instead of thinking like A to B on quests, or if this happens then this, you just have to think of like, how is the world going to react with what they just did, and taking more of a step back from it. Because I don't think that problems for players are like a formula. You can't, they can't basically boil it down to a mathematical equation to where this solves this solves this. It's not going to work that way. You just have to understand the world you're creating and figure out what happens based on what they do, which pretty much sums up everything that a DM does. You make the world, figure out how how it reacts based on what your players do.
Yeah. That was unless there's any other, how do you calculate rewards for your party during the quest and on completion?
Dice roll.
Their reward is the friendships they made along the way. No, I'm kidding. So a couple things. It depends on what kind of game you're running. In games that use XP is a reward in itself. I'm a big fan of milestone, so all the games that I run use milestone, which means that major events will cause leveling, things like that, more time based. But when it comes to like, it could be XP, it could be treasure. There are tons of calculators for what level the characters are and kind of what they're doing and how much treasure they could get. There's tons of things that'll automatically roll all that for you. I use it all the time. I'll do my rolls. I'll look at it and be like, that doesn't make sense. I'm going to change that. I might roll something else, that kind of stuff. Or maybe you roll on the table and say, oh, I want to insert something else here that's important to the story. Do some of that stuff. That's great. XP, treasure, favors, gaining the favor of someone that's important in the world. Land, real estate, depending on the quest, right? All kinds of things that you can reward characters in game for things that they're doing.
Land as a reward might become more interesting in the next iteration of D&D, with the new Bastion stuff that they're talking about. So
yeah,
we forgot to talk about all that stuff.
Yeah. It kind of snuck up on us.
Yeah. So Kaya is asking about session 0 for the first time on my server. Do you have any advice for me to tell my DM? So number one, it's good that you're having a session 0, right? Because that's the first step. I would say that, and your DM probably has an idea of what they're already going to run through. I know for me, I write up a document that has like a quick blurb of like, here's the world, here's some important information about the world, here's some information maybe about the characters. I'll go into like rule stuff, like any like homebrew rules that I use, any optional stuff that I use, like the mechanical crunchy stuff I include in there. But I'll also include a section to where you kind of talk with the players about kind of two major things. One thing is like, what kind of campaign do you want this to be? Right. That's sort of a very big question, but you need to find out what's fun for your players, because really, if they're not having fun and you're making content that's not fun for them, kind of, what are you doing at that point, right? Just figure out what kind of game they want to play, what stuff they like, and then on the opposite of that, find out things that they don't like. You know, and for every campaign that I've run and every one shot that I've run, I talk about like, hey, if there's something that you don't want to see in this game, like, let's talk about it, let's get it out in the open. Because I know for me as a DM, and I think that in I know in our group there's some pretty obvious things that we've all talked about that we weren't going to include the game anyway, but there are a lot of other things that maybe wouldn't have served within a conversation. Very popular example that I use is with Bun. Bun has very severe arachnophobia, so you're not going to see any of that stuff in my games if she's playing. And that's something that, if I was a new DM and didn't know her, that wouldn't come up unless you're discussing it. So it's very important that you discuss these things. Other things that I've had are, if a player is like a parent, they might say, hey, I don't want any like violence or kids in like dangerous situations at all, because that is terrifying to me. I know for me as a player, like, hey, if I have like pets, like my horse or like a dog that's not like in combat and doesn't have mechanics, like, I don't want them to like die. Like, that's kind of what we've done too, is I've brought that into my campaign. It's like, hey, if you have horses that you paid for and y'all mess up and something happens, they're gonna run away, gone forever. But I'm not gonna have any of that in my game where like, oh, your horses are dead because you made a bad decision. Like, I don't like that personally. But those are some things, that some big rocks that I can kind of give you, just in my experience of what I've talked about for session zeros. What about you two? Can you think of anything?
You nailed most of it yeah, you nailed it. I don't know what I'm trying to say. But
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't
I
mean to
feel
take
like-
all of it, but it just kind of fell out.
Yeah.
I mean-
I feel like on our podcast we talk about the importance of a session zero a lot, because a lot of future problems might not ever become problems if you have a session zero and you discuss all those things. So
I don't know if we had a proper talk on session zero. I think it's sprinkled throughout all our podcasts, but maybe we should have like an official Tome of Knowledge session zero.
I thought we did, but
I thought so too. But
I'll have to look back at the previous
Maybe-
episode and the notes, but maybe we should do
the
one about
episode
that.
1 or 2, like the earlier episodes, but
But
and just make sure that everyone's comfortable with each other, because it's easy for people to get defensive or reactionary, especially like, well, I don't want this in our game, and then some other player might be like, well, I like those things. So it's a
Mhm.
lot of compromise as well.
Mhm.
So hopefully there's no like people hitting buds or conflicting, because again, it's about having fun and making sure everyone is playing in a safe
Mhm.
space and having a good time.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned earlier, VS, of that D&D is a collaborative game. Like, keyword on the collaborative. Just because something's fun for you doesn't mean it's fun for everybody. And really, the idea is for everybody to have fun, not at the expense of someone else. So,
Yeah, Kaya, just send them this video and get to this spot. And you're like, hey, if it's easier for people to hear it from other people instead of from oneself, then yeah, then we're here.
But yeah, and I'll say too, for everyone watching or listening in the future, if you have any ideas of stuff that you want us to talk about, please let us know. Throw it in our Discord, tweet it at us, put it in the YouTube comments. Because for me, if there's something that you all want to hear, I think I would rather pick topics that you all want help with or want more context with. So
Yep. Definitely let us know.
yeah, for sure. Any other thoughts on quests, gentlemen?
I think we nailed it.
Yeah.
I think so too. We did it. Congratulations, everybody.
Thank you.
Yay! We'll give ourselves a round of applause.
Speaking of voices, because my voice was out during TwitchCon, I came up with a new voice, and I typically record a video of myself in the new voice. So hopefully one day I can use that for something.
Yeah, we'll just, when Azric dies. I'm kidding.
Oh my god.
I'm kidding. Oh man.
Put that evil on me.
Anyway, thanks everybody for hanging out, watching, or listening. Like I said, if you have any suggestions or stuff you want to hear about or want to know more about, please let us know. We'd be happy to cover it. Or even just join live and we'll answer questions in chat and things too, as we always do. With that being said, tomorrow we've got Bun who's doing our art stream at 7. And then on Friday this week, we've got our next episode of the campaign. And if I'm not mistaken, I think everyone is back. We've been kind of, it's been a weird like hit or miss like couple weeks with things going on, but I think everyone is back for Friday, unless my flight's delayed and I'm trapped in an airport. But I won't
roll
knock
dice,
on wood
man.
on that. Yeah.
I'm not sure what's gonna happen next or this coming Friday, but people might need to bring tissues. I don't know. We'll see.
Ooh.
Hmm.
Anyway, thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. See ya.